Hello, how are you? Well, it's a true pleasure to be here today. My name is Roberto Alonso. I work in Hong Kong. I'm a musician, an artist, a theorist. I don't actually know where I am anymore, but I guess that gives a little bit of a framing of what I've done over the past few years. Later on, Marek, colleagues in the next session, will be presenting some very interesting ideas. I believe we've been working together on a bunch of projects for like 5 years now related to AI that involve artistic practice, but also a lot of research. And in outreach, we have a pretty cool podcast and so on. And what I wanted to do today, given the kind of breadth of the panel's topic, is to present a straightforward and maybe fragmentary set of 10 reflections on music and artificiality. And I want this to work as a kind of positioning through overlapping reframings of related ideas of our views on music. And I want this also to act as a counterpart to what Marek is going to be presenting later on. So, first reflection is on the historical contingency of the musically possible. And my starting premise here is that the boundaries of the musically possible, along with its institutional definitions, are historically contingent, as music exists within an evolving margin of limited possibilities. We can think here from the earliest forms of musical notation, like the Mesopotamian Hurrian hymn to Nikal, to the exploration of rhythmic complexity in the later part of the 20th century in the Western tradition, or the graphic notations that we find in the exhibition. For example, there is some very interesting work by Xenakis that you might have seen. We can think the evolution from the Neanderthal flute to complex electronic and digital instrumentalities and new interfaces, really interesting interfaces like those developed by Leticia, who will be presenting later. We can think of the early experiments in algorithmic codification and, contemporary forms of live coding, for example. Alexandra was here earlier, and the development of multi-agent systems like Solmax 2 at IRCAM, or our own Archon that we developed a couple of years ago that stem from the research that George has been putting together since the 90s in systems like Voyager. We can think of the ritualistic use of Natufian flutes in the Sea of Galilee, and then the emergence of the public concert in 18th century Europe, the opera house, the stadium experience, or the kind of headphone experience of modern urban commuters, where you're listening to everything through headphones. Isolated listening, they call it, yeah? We can also think of the centrality of sound and social interaction in the kind of performative and compositional practices that are classical of the musical paradigms that we've grown up with, and their transformation of a current status where music has become metadata that feeds new consumption paradigms exemplified by companies, for example, like Spotify. So the question is, how then does the historical evolution of the musically possible shape our understanding of music in the context of automation and its relationship with AI? Second reflection on the automation of musical processes. If we analyze the historical uses of algorithmic models and machine learning in music, we see that the dominant approach has been to sound generation and compositional approaches that treat sound as an ossified and reified phenomenon. They emerge from music as a figure of sound. This model, that's what we argue, can be framed within what Luciana Parisi defines as the servo-mechanic relationship with technology, what she defines as the slave machine, wherein the focus is on automating processes that ultimately lead to more of the same, the more of the same paradigm. I argue that this approach stems from a long defunct tradition in which musical work is equated with compositional practice. And I hope that we all know that that's not the case. But if automation has led to a further reification of sound, what role do musical instrumentalities play in this process, especially when we consider AI as a tool for musical creation? Our third reflection here is on music, instrumentalities, AI, and semantics. Historically, musical instruments have served as surfaces of musical inscription, functioning as epistemic tools, or epistemic artifacts, if you want, that influence, shape, and regulate the ways we create music. However, when the processual nature of interface regimes becomes ossified, instruments themselves turn into objects of processes, as Thor Magnusson puts it, things in the making, mediated, unstable, not quite given, deferred. In this sense, instruments are both unstable technological objects and historical longitudinal events. The question is, what are the dominant paradigms of AI instrumentalities, and how do current AI interface regimes govern the musical domain? And that's our fourth reflection here on music and interface regimes. Current commercial AI interfaces follow, in general, something that we call a transcriptive approach. There's a linear input-output workflow with a kind of blinking cursor paradigm. A user has ideas that are translated into a symbolic representation that limits the potential for dynamic and non-linear interactions, reducing AI to a tool and executor more than a creative partner. We argue that by drawing inspiration from the field of musical practice and musical instrumentality, where complex, non-linear, co-creative relationships between humans, materials, and sounds are the norm, we can rethink AI interfaces to move beyond traditional input-output paradigms and toward interfaces that support iterative, improvisational, and systemic engagement, unlocking new possibilities for human AI creativity. In addition, semantic AI, I'm sure that if you've used AI today, you probably use text as a medium, is the natural outcome of the expanding semiotization of existence brought about by semio and cognitive capitalism. Existing musical AI tools have emerged from and reinforced the centrality of music as a figure of sound and ignored its role in what Nina Edgheim defines as intermaterial vibrational practice. How, then, can a shift away from this transcriptive approach influence the development and application of generative AI or AI in general in music? Our fifth reflection is on music and generative AI. Generative AI has failed, historically, to deliver on its early promises of malleability and flexibility, to become a machinic stack of endless iteration. But music-related research has historically explored different uses of machine learning that point to the limitations of current semantic AI models. We are thinking here of LLMs, everything that has emerged from the transformer model since 2017, and some of the examples that we were looking at before, from ChatGPT to similar interfaces that use the word as a kind of midpoint, Suno, Udo, and so on. These examples that we find in music practice that are really interesting include the exploration of interactive machine learning, reinforcement learning architectures, but also shallow models and ML-based computational agents. Our sixth reflection is on music and artifice. And I think that's one of the key themes today. So what about artificiality? We can identify a trope of music as an artifice of the human voice that has historically evolved to integrate philosophical, biological, and cultural perspectives. It ranges from the Darwinian connection between music and courtship to the more kind of contemporary work of cognitive theorists like Bjorn Merker, or the work of neuroscientists like Daniel Levitin. Thus, and I think this is really important, music has always been an artifice, an artificial relationship to sonic entanglements embedded in a mesh of practices, ideas, and objects. But how do machine learning and AI, and these are concepts that we can try to frame later, impact the already artificial nature of music? First, we argue that this happens through the servo-mechanic paradigm of computational automation, that is the servo-mechanic idea of repeating processes. Also, and most importantly, and that's our argument, through the emergence of agential models in which machine learning is explored as a non-essentially mimicking otherness. If we think about the origins of artificial intelligence in its model conception, we go back to the Turing test, is a mimicking exercise. Is intelligence a matter of mimicking? That's something we can discuss later. If we think of this second option, we could talk about Benjamin Bratton, and he would argue that humans are not the sole agents of cognitive processes. And again, this opens a lot of questions, but the cognitive processes happen beyond the kind of anthropocentric and anthropomorphic reality. Instead, what Bratton proposes is that humans can interact with, facilitate, and augment forms of intelligence that arise in natural and artificial systems. Seventh reflection on music versus sonic content generation. What challenge does machine learning driven audio generation pose to musical practice? If we look at the larger commercial picture, current boundless audio generation seems to equate material with practice, saturating the market with content and promising an ultimate expansion of the sonically possible that it fails to deliver. Against this potential diversity, a kind of heterogeneous exploration of all of the possibilities of the sound, let's put it that way, musical generative AI coalesces into increasingly monadic and monocultural trends, leading to the compulsive reproduction of more of the same, still dominated by style transfer paradigms in an endless exercise of repetitive compulsion. The question then becomes, what happens when we conflate audio content generation with music? Say, the brush with the painting, the camera with photography. That is the tool with the practice. Is there still a thing called music? Or has it become something else? Or should we be talking maybe about musicianship instead of music qua music? Furthermore, should we shift our focus from music as an object to the practices and musicianship that actually define it? Eighth reflection. On music as and through practice versus what I call ontological essentialism. In the past, a book that I wrote a few years ago, and it was already old when it was published, but it's still an interesting exercise, I guess. I've discussed the idea of ontological essentialism and the historical relationship between music and philosophy as a top-down approach to the definition of the musically possible. And what I want to say here is, should we not approach musical practices instead through a bottom-up approach to understand their evolution and potential future? Should we not attempt to identify the impact of machine learning models in music through the resultant transformation instead of an a priori definition of what a machine learning model might do, which is also interesting, but seems to be more of a computer science kind of question. How does this shift in focus affect our understanding of musicianship in a landscape where AI is increasingly embedded into everything we do and we interact with? Ninth reflection, musicianship versus musical economy. My argument here relates to the evolution of the idea of musicianship since the publication of Robert Rowe's book 20 years ago. And this is a provocative statement. We have to prepare ourselves as musicians, not for the death of music qua music, but for the dramatic and powerful, and this is going to raise questions later, I'm sure, total democratization of musicianship and its universal distribution across all classes of participation. It's not music qua music that dies, nor the musician, but rather musicianship as a specific producer of value in a musical economy. In this new economy, could AI and machine learning redefine performance practice and the collaborative nature of music making? So what is the future? And our final reflection here stems from the following question. Is there room for a true transformative impact of machine learning and AI on music as performance? I'm not talking about composition. I'm not talking about sound generation. That goes beyond the current iterative compulsion of audio generation. If we were to identify it, we would revert to the idea of distributed multi-agent systems and some of our current research into a system that we're developing called Janus that aims to transform what it means to collaborate or perform in an ensemble. These ensembles are non-local. They're not necessarily playing scripted music, but bound together by a platform environment and contributing to an ongoing global musical project and piece, training and developing the system within which they operate. As such, the future impact of AI on music and music as performance will have less to do with AI as a generative tool and more to do with AI as an embedded force of cultural engineering. Thank you.